The alien forces, known as the Star, had descended upon Earth with one goal in mind: annihilation. They were swift, efficient, and ruthless. The human race, though resourceful, had never faced an enemy quite like this. The Star believed they were invincible. They had conquered countless worlds, each one falling to their hive-minded strategies and superior technology. Their collective intelligence was their greatest strength. Every Star soldier thought and acted as one, unified, calculating, unbeatable. And they were certain that the humans, scattered and disjointed, would fall easily. But as the invasion continued, something unexpected began to happen. The Star, having crushed every civilization that fell before them, didn't anticipate the fierce resistance that came from humans. They underestimated the strength of individual minds working independently, each human making decisions that felt personal, that had heart, and that carried a drive beyond mere survival. On the ground, Captain James Decker stood tall in front of the remnants of his squad. The battle had been intense, and the alien forces showed no signs of slowing down. The humans, however, kept getting back up. He'd seen it time and time again, fighting units scattered across the battlefield, acting without coordination yet somehow, miraculously, managing to stay alive. It was as if the humans, in their disarray, were somehow winning. "Keep moving," Decker shouted, pushing his men forward, his voice breaking through the chaos. His eyes scanned the battlefield. The Star soldiers were relentless, and yet, they were faltering. They couldn't predict the movements of their enemies. Where they expected a coordinated human assault, they were met with a scattering of guerrilla tactics, individual acts of bravery, and unforeseen distractions. A group of Star soldiers advanced on Decker's position. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons aimed with precision. But Decker wasn't afraid. He'd seen too many of their attacks to know what they would do next. The humans, despite not having the advantage of a hive mind, could think unpredictably. And that was their weapon. The Star were so sure of their superiority that they never expected a small human squad to create such a disruption. As Decker's team took their positions, the Star slowly encircled them, certain this would be their final stand. But then, as Decker watched, a small group of civilian fighters, men and women who had never seen combat, charged in from behind the enemy lines. They had no training, no military strategy, but their raw determination pushed them forward. They fought with heart, surprising the Star and causing confusion in their ranks. It was chaos, but the humans had a purpose: they would never give in. In the midst of the madness, Decker felt something click inside him. It wasn't strategy, it wasn't the firepower, it wasn't the number of soldiers. It was something more, something the Star couldn't understand. Humanity, in its disarray, had something they could never replicate: the strength of the individual will. He watched as a civilian soldier, with no training and no right to be there, took down a Star general, not by sheer force, but by a simple act of deception. The alien, expecting a direct confrontation, was caught off guard by the human's unpredictable nature. It was an unconventional move, one the Star couldn't have planned for, and it worked. Decker turned to his squad. "This is it. This is what we've got. Our strength is in our independence. And that's something they'll never be able to control." The Star were on the defensive for the first time in the war. They had thought they would break humanity with their unity and collective power. But it was humanity's very lack of unity that became their greatest advantage. The Star might have retreated for a moment, but they were not defeated. It was clear to Captain Decker that the war was far from over. In the days that followed the unexpected victory, humanity struggled to regroup. The alien forces, though shaken, were recalibrating their strategy. They had underestimated the power of human unpredictability, but they were learning fast. Decker's mind raced as he sat in the command center, scanning reports that seemed to get worse by the hour. The Star were more dangerous than he had imagined. Their resilience, though seemingly dependent on their hive mind, was still formidable. Every plan they made was executed with cold precision. The humans, on the other hand, lacked cohesion. There was no central command, no shared direction. What they had instead was a fierce drive to survive, a force that no calculation could predict. "Captain, sir." Lieutenant Harris burst into the room, his face covered in sweat and dirt. "The Star are closing in on Sector 9. Our defenses are crumbling. We can't hold them off much longer." Decker's heart sank. The numbers didn't lie. The humans were losing ground, and fast. The alien forces were relentless, and their technology was light years ahead of humanity's. Still, Decker refused to surrender. There had to be a way. "We need to buy more time," Decker said, standing up and gripping his comlink. "Get me the civilian militia. We need every hand we can get." The militia was composed of ordinary people, farmers, mechanics, teachers, anyone who had not been killed in the early days of the invasion. They had no training, no formal military experience. But they had one thing that the Star didn't, the will to fight. Decker had seen it time and time again, people who didn't know how to fight, yet somehow managed to outsmart the alien forces with nothing but their instinct and courage. Decker's team was small, but they were determined. The plan was simple: create as much chaos as possible, disrupt the alien command structure, and buy humanity a little more time to regroup. It was a long shot, but it was all they had left. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Decker and his squad moved silently through the ruins of the city. The Star had taken most of the strategic positions, and their ships hovered above the skyline like vultures, waiting to swoop in and crush what remained of humanity. Decker had no illusions, they were desperate. But desperation, he knew, had a way of bringing out the best in humans. "Ready, Captain," Harris said, checking his weapon. "We've got a squad of civilians moving in. They're not trained, but they're ready." Decker nodded grimly. "We don't have a choice. We fight, or we die." The plan was set into motion. The civilians, armed with makeshift weapons, moved quickly and quietly, spreading out to set traps, sabotage alien equipment, and strike wherever they could cause the most damage. It wasn't a conventional fight. It was chaos. But chaos, as Decker had learned, was humanity's secret weapon. The Star, believing they had secured the city, were completely caught off guard when a series of explosions rocked their command center. What had started as a minor skirmish turned into an all-out assault as small groups of humans launched ambushes from all directions. The Star soldiers, used to their collective intelligence, found themselves overwhelmed by the unpredictable nature of their enemies. They didn't know where the next attack would come from. They couldn't predict who would strike next. And that made them afraid. Decker watched from a rooftop as the chaos unfolded. The civilian militia, despite their lack of training, fought like warriors. They didn't move in perfect formation, and their tactics weren't flawless. But they were unpredictable, and that was all that mattered. The Star were trying to adapt, but they were struggling. "They're panicking," Harris said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "The aliens, they don't know what to do." Decker smiled grimly. "Good. Let them panic. That's when we strike." The battle raged through the night. Star ships were downed, and their ground forces were disoriented. The civilians, bolstered by Decker's squad, fought fiercely, taking back key positions and forcing the alien forces into retreat. The battle wasn't over, but humanity had gained a small but crucial victory. But the toll was steep. By the end of the night, the civilian militia had lost half of their fighters. Decker knew the cost of victory. Every inch of ground was paid for with blood. As dawn broke over the battlefield, Decker stood among the wreckage, the bodies of his fallen comrades scattered around him. But there was no time to mourn. The victory, though hard-won, was fleeting. As Decker stood in the quiet aftermath of the battle, the weight of the loss began to sink in. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of fallen alien ships and the bodies of both his soldiers and civilians. Yet despite the victory, Decker couldn't shake the grim reality. The Star had retreated, yes, but only temporarily. They were regrouping, adapting, and they would be back. "Captain," Lieutenant Harris said softly, stepping beside him, "we've got survivors. Civilians who are still holding the line. But, we've lost more than half our forces. We can't keep fighting like this forever." Decker turned his gaze to the horizon, the flickering orange glow of distant fires casting shadows over the city ruins. The war was taking a toll on everyone, but Decker wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet. We need to give them hope," Decker replied, his voice resolute. "We need to show them that we can win this. Even if it's just one battle at a time." But deep down, Decker knew it wasn't just the aliens they were fighting, it was themselves. Humanity's fractured nature, their lack of a hive mind, had both helped and hindered them. On one hand, it allowed them to be unpredictable, to fight in ways the Star couldn't anticipate. But on the other, it created a deep division, with different factions fighting for control, different strategies clashing in the midst of chaos. It was this fragmentation that weighed on Decker's mind. How could humanity truly defeat the Star when they couldn't even agree on the best way to fight back? How could they come together when each individual, each group, thought so differently? Days turned into weeks. The survivors of the battle began to rebuild, though their spirits were low. Every person who had lost a friend, a family member, felt the grief in their bones. But Decker could see something else in them, too. It was the spark of determination. Despite the losses, despite the pain, they were still fighting. It was that human spirit, that will to carry on, that Decker had come to rely on. And yet, he knew it wasn't enough. The Star were still coming. Their hive mind made them relentless, their superior technology made them deadly. As Decker walked through the camp, he stopped to speak with some of the survivors. An old man, once a mechanic, now a fighter, sat by the fire, his hands shaking as he sharpened his weapon. He looked up at Decker, eyes full of sorrow, but also something else, something more. "You know," the man said, "I've never been in a war before. Never thought I'd have to fight. But here we are. And I'm still here. I'm not going down without a fight, Captain." Decker smiled at him, the corners of his lips lifting with a sense of pride. "I know. And you're not alone." But even as the words left his mouth, Decker knew something had to change. They couldn't keep fighting this way. There had to be something more they could do. Something to unite humanity, to make them stronger. Meanwhile, the Star were regrouping. Their forces were larger, their strategy more refined, and they had learned from their earlier mistakes. They had underestimated humanity, and now they knew that their collective intelligence wasn't enough to defeat the humans. The humans fought unpredictably, as individuals, and that was a force the Star could not control. But the Star had an advantage too. They had begun to study human behavior, trying to understand how their enemy fought. They had come to a disturbing realization: it wasn't just the unpredictability of humanity that made them dangerous. It was the humans' drive to survive, to fight for their families, their homes, and their way of life. The Star, despite their superior technology and unity, lacked that deep, personal connection to their cause. They fought because it was their nature, but the humans fought because it was their choice. Back on Earth, Decker was beginning to see a way forward. The humans had no central command, no unified hive mind. But they had something else, the ability to adapt, to think for themselves, to sacrifice for the greater good. Decker began to rally his people not just through force, but through inspiration. He reminded them of what they were fighting for: their families, their freedom, their right to survive. As the days passed, the survivors began to unite. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, still moments of tension between factions. But the message was clear: they had to fight together, even if they fought in different ways. "Whatever our differences," Decker said in a speech to the survivors, "we're all human. And that's what makes us stronger than they could ever understand. We might not have a hive mind, but we have something much more powerful, the power of the individual, of the human spirit." The air was thick with tension as the star warship hovered ominously above the human camp. It was cloaked, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but the low hum of its engines reverberated through the ground, shaking the earth beneath Decker's feet. He stood at the head of his small group, his hands clenched into fists, his mind racing for a solution. They had been so close to rebuilding, so close to organizing the remnants of humanity into a coherent force. Now, it seemed as if all their efforts would be in vain. The Star's stealth technology was perfect, and their weapons, devastating. Decker's squad was outgunned and outmatched. "Sir," Harris spoke, his voice tight with anxiety, "we need to get the civilians out. This is bad. We'll never survive this attack." Decker shook his head. "No. We fight. We can't keep running, Harris. If we retreat, it's over. This is our home, and we'll be damned if we let them take it." The battle-scarred soldiers around him nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They'd seen enough to know that survival wasn't just about running or hiding. It was about standing up and fighting back, no matter the odds. The star warship landed slowly, its enormous metallic frame casting a long shadow across the battlefield. Its weapons fired instantly, searing through the air with deadly precision. A few civilian fighters who had stayed behind to protect their homes were the first to fall, their screams echoing through the air. Decker's mind raced, but he knew one thing for sure: the Star didn't know how to fight in the way humans did. They relied on their hive mind, their collective intelligence, to anticipate moves, but humans were unpredictable. That was their strength. If they could create enough chaos, enough confusion, the Star would start to doubt themselves. Decker had seen it before. "We hit them hard, and we hit them fast," Decker barked. "Get the traps in place, hit their sensors. We need to make them think we're everywhere." As the human forces scattered, chaos erupted. The civilians, armed with everything from scavenged weapons to makeshift explosives, worked alongside the trained soldiers in a surprising show of coordination. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was effective. The Star had been trained to fight as one, and they were used to dealing with organized armies. But the humans, scattered, unpredictable, came at them from every angle, each strike different from the last. The Star soldiers, though formidable, could not keep up. Their hive mind worked against them as they tried to react to humanity's wild, unpredictable strikes. Decker could see it in their eyes: doubt. The alien forces were starting to realize that this wasn't the same battle they had fought before. The warship's cloaking system flickered momentarily, and in that instant, Decker seized the opportunity. "Now," he shouted. A group of human fighters, including Harris, fired their weapons into the exposed underbelly of the ship. The first shot took out one of its engines, sending it spiraling out of control. The Star aboard the ship were thrown into disarray, their orders meaningless as the ship lurched. Decker wasn't finished yet. "Get to the control room," he ordered, rallying a few soldiers to storm the bridge. They were close now, close to ending this. The Star had underestimated humanity's resolve, and it was about to cost them dearly. The squad worked together, a perfect blend of human unpredictability and pure determination. With each step, the Star were pushed back, their precision turning into confusion. Decker's team fought like ghosts, moving fast, appearing from different directions, striking unexpectedly. And soon, the Star's command structure fell apart. The warship was in chaos. As Decker reached the control room, he hesitated. The door was blasted open, revealing a room filled with alien technology and Star soldiers, but Decker didn't see aliens, he saw an opportunity. The ship's systems were designed for coordination, for unified control. But what if they could disrupt that? Decker motioned for Harris to join him at the main console. Can you hack their systems? Harris didn't hesitate. I'll try. His fingers moved quickly, navigating the alien technology with surprising skill. Within moments, the console flashed with data, and the ship's systems began to flicker. "Captain," Harris said with a smile. "We're in. Let's send them a message." Decker's eyes lit up. He understood immediately. If they could reprogram the ship's systems to scramble its communications, they could sever the Star's hive-mind connection. Without that, the alien forces would be fragmented, unable to communicate or coordinate with each other. They'd be vulnerable. Decker grinned as Harris's fingers flew over the console. The Star's systems began to glitch, their unity shattered. The once organized forces of the Star were now isolated, each soldier acting on its own, unable to communicate with the others. Chaos spread throughout the ship. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. "Time to finish this," Decker said, and with that, he pressed a button on the console that triggered the ship's self-destruct sequence. The warship would be destroyed in minutes, and the Star would lose one of their most powerful assets. As the warship exploded in the distance, a shockwave of energy rippled across the battlefield. The remaining Star forces, disoriented and disorganized, began to retreat, scrambling to regroup. The humans had done it. They had won. Decker stood in the wreckage, watching the smoke rise from the destroyed warship. There were no celebrations, no cheers. The victory was hard-won, and the cost had been high. But humanity had proven something to the Star, and to themselves. The weeks following the destruction of the Star warship were filled with cautious optimism. Humanity had, for the first time in the war, dealt a major blow to the alien invaders. But despite their victory, the survivors knew that the battle was far from over. The Star, though stunned by the humans' unpredictable tactics, were relentless. They had regrouped and come up with new strategies to counter the human insurgency. Captain Decker sat in the makeshift command center, studying the holographic map of the planet. The map was littered with red and yellow markers, signifying key battle sites and areas where the Star were making their next move. It was clear that the Star had learned from their earlier mistakes. Their next phase of the war would be a brutal one, and Decker had no illusions about the cost. "Captain," Harris spoke, breaking Decker's concentration. "We've received word from the Southern Front. The Star are pushing hard. If we don't reinforce them, we risk losing control of the last major human stronghold." Decker's jaw tightened. "We don't have the manpower, Harris. We've stretched ourselves thin as it is. We'll have to make do with what we've got. But if we don't move now, we'll lose everything," Harris urged. Decker nodded reluctantly. The decision was difficult, but it was one that had to be made. "Prepare the squads. We're going to the Southern Front." As Decker and his team made their way through the decimated landscape, he couldn't help but think about how far they had come. When the Star first arrived, humanity had been on the brink of destruction. Their uncoordinated tactics, their lack of a hive mind, seemed like a weakness. But now, it was their greatest asset. They had turned the tables by embracing their individuality, by refusing to be molded into a single, predictable entity. The human resistance had grown stronger in the face of adversity. Communities had rallied together, forming coalitions based on shared survival, but each faction remained fiercely independent. They weren't bound by a single leader, a single strategy. They were bound by something far stronger, a will to survive, to fight for their homes, their families, and their way of life. As Decker's squad approached the Southern Front, they encountered the first signs of battle. The sound of gunfire echoed through the air, and the earth trembled beneath their feet from the explosions. The Star were here, and they were relentless. The human forces, though outnumbered and outgunned, stood their ground. They fought fiercely, using every bit of terrain to their advantage, moving unpredictably, striking quickly, and then vanishing into the landscape before the Star could respond. "We're not here to hold the line," Decker said to his team. "We're here to break them. Get to the command center, disable their systems, and leave them in the dark. The more confusion we can cause, the better." The battle raged for hours, and Decker's squad worked tirelessly to disrupt the Star's communications. They targeted the alien technology, planting explosives in key areas and hacking into their command center to scramble their systems. With each successful strike, the Star forces became more disoriented. But it wasn't without cost. The Star retaliated fiercely, and the human resistance began to buckle under the pressure. Decker watched as one of his men, Corporal Gannon, was struck down by an alien laser blast. His heart clenched, but there was no time for grief. They had a mission to complete. With a heavy heart, Decker pushed forward, rallying the remaining members of his team. They reached the Star Command Center, and Decker gave the order to plant the final charges. The building shook with the force of the explosion, and for a moment, the battlefield was silent. The silence didn't last long. A Star warship descended from the sky, its massive form casting a shadow over the battlefield. The retreating Star forces had called for backup, and the human resistance was about to face the full brunt of their enemy's might. The battle had just taken a dangerous turn. "We need to fall back," Harris shouted, his voice urgent. "We can't take on that ship head-to-head." Decker didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of strategy and desperation. They were outmatched. But humanity had something the Star didn't, the ability to think and act independently. He glanced at his squad, determination burning in his eyes. "We won't fall back," Decker said, his voice calm yet resolute. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. If we can disable their shields, we'll have a chance. Harris, can you get us to their power source?" Harris nodded without hesitation. "On it." Decker turned to the rest of the squad. "Everyone else, cover Harris. We move fast, hit hard, and get out. Understood?" There was no time for second-guessing. The squad moved into action, weaving through the wreckage of the battlefield, making their way toward the Star warship. The alien vessel was heavily guarded, but it was also slow, heavy with the weight of its own overconfidence. They didn't expect humanity to make such an audacious move. As Decker and his squad reached the warship's power core, Harris quickly worked to disable the ship's shield generators. The Star soldiers guarding the entrance didn't stand a chance against the unpredictability of the human assault. The squad moved with precision and speed, incapacitating the aliens before they even had time to react. "Shields are down," Harris called out. "Now or never, Captain." Decker gave the signal, and the final explosives were placed. The blast that followed was deafening. The Star warship's power core detonated, sending a shockwave of energy through the battlefield. The alien forces, now leaderless and in disarray, began to retreat once again. It wasn't a victory, yet, but it was another significant step forward. As Decker surveyed the battlefield, a moment of clarity washed over him. The humans weren't winning because they had superior technology. They weren't winning because they had better weapons or more soldiers. They were winning because they had something the Star couldn't replicate, the ability to act independently, to think for themselves, and to adapt on the fly. The victory at the Southern Front had given humanity a moment of reprieve, but Decker knew it was only temporary. The Star were relentless, and despite their defeat in the last battle, they were still a formidable enemy. If they were going to survive, humanity would need more than just small victories and clever tactics. They needed to unite, to push back with everything they had. Decker stood before his assembled forces, scanning the faces of the men and women who had followed him through hell and back. Some were seasoned fighters, but many were civilians who had taken up arms to protect their homes and families. He saw fear in their eyes, fear of the unknown, fear of what the Star could still throw at them. But beneath that fear, he saw something else, a glimmer of hope. Humanity was tired, bruised, and broken, but they weren't finished. Not yet. Listen up, Decker began, his voice carrying across the room. The Sthar think they've won. They think we're beaten. But we're not. They can try to crush us, but they'll never break us. We fight because we have something they'll never understand, the will to survive, the will to protect our families, our homes, our way of life. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The room was silent, but the tension in the air shifted, becoming more determined. We're going to hit them where it hurts. We know their weaknesses now. They don't know how to fight like us, on our own terms. They think they can predict us, but we've shown them that they can't. We will strike when they least expect it. We will hit hard, and we will hit fast. This is our last chance. If we don't finish this now, there won't be another chance. The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. They were ready. Humanity was ready for the final push. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Decker's team, along with the remaining human fighters, would infiltrate the Sthar's Central Command Base, a heavily fortified facility deep in enemy territory. There, they would disable the alien fleet's main communication network, causing chaos and confusion throughout their forces. Without their central command, the Sthar would be unable to coordinate their next move, effectively crippling their ability to mount a counterattack. It was a bold plan, and it would require every ounce of human ingenuity and strength. But Decker knew it was their only shot. The night before the operation, Decker couldn't sleep. He sat alone, staring at the map of the enemy's command center, his mind running through the plan again and again. He couldn't afford any mistakes. If they failed, the war would be over. And humanity would fall. His thoughts were interrupted when Harris entered the tent. "You okay, Captain?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Decker sighed, rubbing his face. "I keep going over the plan in my head. What if we miss something? What if they know we're coming?" "They don't," Harris said confidently. "We've caught them off guard every step of the way. They've never seen anything like us, Captain. And that's why we're going to win." Decker looked up at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're right. We've already won in ways they don't understand." The next morning, Decker and his team set out for the Sthar base. The journey was perilous, taking them through dangerous terrain, heavily patrolled by Sthar soldiers. But the humans were determined, moving silently through the shadows, using their knowledge of the land to stay one step ahead of their enemies. As they neared the command center, Decker gave the signal for the final approach. The team moved into position, their hearts pounding in their chests, adrenaline coursing through their veins. They had trained for this moment, and now it was time to execute. Inside the Sthar base, the atmosphere was tense. The aliens were preparing for a major offensive. They had underestimated humanity before, and now they were overcompensating, spreading their forces too thin. The Sthar believed that with their advanced technology, they could overpower any resistance. What they didn't account for was the human spirit, the unwillingness to surrender, the refusal to accept defeat. Decker's team infiltrated the command center, using their unpredictability to confuse and disorient the alien guards. They moved like shadows, striking quickly and silently, disabling enemy communication systems, and planting explosives in key areas. The Sthar, once unified by their hive mind, were now disjointed and confused. They couldn't predict the human assault. They couldn't react fast enough. And it was this chaos that gave humanity the upper hand. Decker and his team reached the heart of the Sthar Command Center, where the central communication hub was located. The final explosives were set, and the countdown began. "This is it," Harris said, checking his gear one last time. Decker nodded. "Let's make it count." As they activated the explosives, a massive explosion ripped through the Sthar's central network, sending shockwaves through their command center. The lights flickered, and the hum of the alien machinery died down. The Star soldiers, once organized and precise, were now in disarray. Without their central command, they had no idea how to respond. The human forces outside the base launched their final assault. The Star were scattered, unable to communicate with each other, unable to fight as one. They had underestimated humanity once again, and now, it was too late to recover. The dust from the last explosions still hung in the air, swirling like a storm of shattered dreams and broken expectations. The Star warships, once a symbol of their unyielding might, lay in ruins on the scorched earth. The ground was littered with the remains of fallen soldiers, both human and alien, but the tide had finally turned in humanity's favor. For the first time since the war began, there was a quiet sense of victory hanging in the air. Captain Decker stood among the wreckage, his mind replaying the final battle over and over. The Star had underestimated humanity, over and over again. And each time, humanity had surprised them. It wasn't just the strength of their weapons or the cunning of their strategies. It was their spirit. It was their individuality. And it was that spirit that had won the war. As the remaining human soldiers, fighters, and civilians gathered in the wreckage, Decker took a deep breath. The fight was over. The Star had been defeated. But the cost of victory was undeniable. Decker looked around at the faces of the survivors. They were tired, their bodies battered, their eyes weary from the battles they had fought. But they were alive. And they were free. "We did it," Harris said, stepping beside Decker, his voice full of awe. Decker nodded, his gaze sweeping over the people who had fought alongside him. "We did. But it wasn't just about winning the war. It was about showing the Star what we're made of. We didn't win because of our numbers or our strength. We won because we refused to give up, because we didn't think the same way they did. We fought as individuals, and that made all the difference." Harris smiled. "You're right. We fought as one, but not because we had to. We fought because we wanted to." The final surrender of the Star came swiftly after their communication network was shattered. With no way to coordinate their forces and no central command to lead them, the remaining alien soldiers scattered across the planet. But even as they fled, Decker knew that their defeat wasn't just a military loss, it was a cultural one. The Star had always prided themselves on their hive mind, their unity, their collective thought. But in the end, it was humanity's refusal to conform, their individualism, that had shattered them. Decker couldn't help but reflect on the irony of it all. The Star had thought they were superior, that their collective intelligence would make them unstoppable. But it was their lack of individuality, their inability to think outside the collective, that had led to their downfall. They had never understood the power of the individual, the strength that came from standing alone yet standing together for a common cause. As the final remnants of the Star forces fled the planet, Decker's mind turned to the future. The war was over, but the world had been forever changed. The scars left by the battle, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. But humanity had won. And Decker knew that whatever came next, the people of Earth would rebuild, not as a collective, but as individuals, each one contributing their strength to the whole. Later that evening, as the sun set over the battlefield, Decker stood alone in front of the ruins of the Star Command Center. The stars above were still, the sky peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. He closed his eyes, feeling the cool breeze on his face, and took a deep breath. The weight of the past years had begun to lift, but the memories of the lost lives, the sacrifices made, would stay with him forever. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Harris approaching, along with a few others, veterans of the war, survivors of the greatest battle humanity had ever fought. "Are you ready, Captain?" Harris asked. Decker looked at the group, his heart swelling with pride. These were the people who had stood by him, who had fought not just for their own survival but for the survival of the human race. They had done it together, even though they were so different. And that, he realized, was the key. It wasn't about being the same. It was about being free to be who they were. "Yeah," Decker said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I think we're ready." As the survivors began the long journey home, Decker's thoughts turned to the future. The war was over, but there was much to be done. The planet was scarred, the cities in ruins, and there was no denying the toll the war had taken. But there was something else: hope. Humanity had proven that they could overcome anything. They had faced down the might of the Star, and they had emerged victorious, not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they had something the aliens could never have: the will to fight, the courage to stand up against impossible odds, and the power of the individual. The life lesson. As the sun set on the horizon, Decker knew that humanity had learned a powerful lesson through their trials. It wasn't their collective power that had saved them, it was their individuality, their resilience, and their refusal to be controlled. The Star had thought they were superior because they thought alike, moved as one. But humanity had shown them that strength didn't come from unity of mind. It came from unity of purpose, fighting for what mattered, even when it seemed like everything was lost. Humanity had proved that, together, they were unstoppable.